Hi guys, back with part 2 of my Sunday MTT narration series. Going to get straight into it. Table 6, T-Rex, we open ace-4 clubs in second position. Get a defend from the big blind, who's been playing sort of from memory on the weaker passive side. We flop a gut shot and backdoor flush draw. Pretty easy board to be c-betting, even though queen high boards, are not the sort of the best textures to be firing multiple barrels on. Obviously when we have equity and when we can pick up additional equity on the turn, it's a pretty happy spot to be intending to barrel on. As well as turns that improve my equity, I'll also be barreling on certainly a jack and a king and an ace, obviously. When a 9 falls, I don't think we get enough of his range to fold, if any of his range. Just simply because, with the board as it currently is, I think, we have enough sort of high card hands and air hands in our range that he might perceive us to try and fire on, because we're opening from early position, and he might view us as trying to use our perceived positional advantage to fire multiple barrels and rep a strong range. In the GSOP 500, we open kings and go multi-way, flop quads. I think checking is, a fine option. Betting's probably okay as well with the diamonds on board. I think they probably pill flop with like eights through to jacks. Probably fold pairs below a 7, simply because I expect, in a freeway pot, they expect my c-betting range to be on the stronger side. So I assume they would either fold immediately, expecting me to have the best hand, or fold because they expect my range to be barreling fairly frequently. So I think by checking back we can sort of rep more middling strength hands. I wouldn't fault anyone for c-betting either. As it's a fine board to be c-betting our air on. So I think if I had just a single king, I'd be more inclined to c-bet. But with quads, it's sort of one of those situations where we literally, it's so difficult for our opponents to call multiple streets with any sort of part of their range. So yeah. In Sunday 500, table 7, I min-opened the ace-10 off there from early position. I think, now that I've been playing MTTs for a few weeks, I've sort of changed that. I've started to 2.5x or 3x when stacks are effectively 80 big blinds plus. I think it works better because people don't 3-bet and 4-bet with the frequency that they do in any type of cash game. So I basically just think we get more value from our opening hands, and we don't have to worry about making our 4-bet bluffs cheaper, because it happens so infrequently. We're going to want a 4-bet bluff less as it is, especially in the early stages, because people just concentrate on playing on the whole more solid poker, trying to make fewer mistakes. So I think this is something I have definitely changed since coming back and playing more sessions. We get 3-bet by the fish Milton in from the small blind, and the big blind comes along, who I believe is also a weaker player. I think our options are, I think peeling is okay, but I also think we're suitably ahead of both of their ranges. So 4-betting to get it in seems good. I'm making it slightly larger than I need to here, simply because I was trying to avoid it going flat and creating a situation like it does. However, my bigger sizing didn't seem to accomplish what I was trying to achieve. Big 109, shoving king 10 off at a weaker table for 13 bigs, second position, probably on the thin side, and it's probably a Nash mistake. However, I think a table as weak as this is probably just about justifiable. In the bigger 55, we 3-bet aces and go multi-way, get a pretty horrendous board for it's basically a board that's, you know, strong for their range, and you know, we're not comfortable firing or even calling all-ins really against their hands, which, you know, it's significant we have the ace of diamonds because we will obviously block flush draw combos. But when the guy jams here, I just, you know, considering we block, I don't think my call's particularly good. I think I should be bet folding, or, you know, I think check folding is a little weak, and it's kind of awkward because our stacks are so short. Our stack size is, you know, so short. Once we bet, relative to the stack to pot ratio, I think we only had a stack to pot ratio of 2 to 1. But yeah, it is a situation where his range is just, you know, ahead of ours in general, and if not, I mean, it's slightly diminished because given we have the ace of diamonds, his, you know, flush draw combos are pretty much non-existent. So with that being said, actually his range is sort of, you know, either two pairs sets, well, the sets that he doesn't get in pre, so certainly he's certainly got one set of jacks in his range. Yes, I think, you know, it's one of those folds that I would like to be making, but I'm not sure, you know, given the depth of stack to pot ratio, you know. And I think in the previous video I had a similar situation where I bet folded aces on a similar board. I could be wrong in saying that, but I think that was the situation. So, you know, it is a spot where if people start recognizing that, you know, I'm bet folding the stronger parts of my range, it's, you know, it's a pretty easy bluff spot for them. But I don't think people are going to be taking enough of advantage of that to really worry about you know, being exploited in that way. So I think, you know, bet folding is definitely going to be the best option. I don't think check folding is particularly good, just because he can turn hands like, you know, under pairs into bluffs if he views me as checking a pretty like defined weak range on that sort of flop texture. But again, you know, the problem with tournaments is we have to make assumptions based on relatively little information, so it's difficult. You know, it's often best to make the sort of the play that that minimizes on our, you know, minimizes how much we have to guess in the hand, and I think checking to fold, or checking to decide what to do, gives us too many factors to sort of guess on, if that makes any sense. That we have to guess whether he's going to be just betting a strong range when check to, whether he's going to be bluffing when check to. You know, all of these assumptions we sort of eliminate by betting and keeping our range, you know, more protected, keeping it slightly more nutted. As we bring in the absence of the big 55 we busted, we bring in the Sunday mulligan, and in the absence of the big 109 we bring in a GSOP table that I think it's the 100 cubed, but I could be wrong. When it flashes up, I'll make sure I know what that is. And we bring in the hot 55 in replace of the Sunday rebuy that we busted. We open ace king with 20 big blinds from the hijack. Get obviously a good board for our hand. This is the type of board that, given stack depth, I would be just firing once small and giving up on with my air. You know, because obviously going to have a sizable stealing range from this position with this stack size. Against Jordan, 3x blind versus blind in the Sunday 500 table 7. So yeah, in the top right, sort of checking, just because, you know, it is a spot where I'd be giving up on my bluffs on the turn, and it's not like a check. I'm not, you know, constantly trying to remain balanced when I play, but I do think, you know, in situations like this where my turn betting range isn't going to be perceived to have air almost ever, which is why it's, you know, occasionally going to be a good spot to bet air. You know, it's a spot where I'm actually pretty. You know, I play quite exploitably on that turn. You know, i.e. checking the stronger parts of my range when I think I'm perceived to, you know, only be checking my air, and betting my bluffs when I'm sort of, I think, perceived to be betting with a stronger range. So, you know, sort of do it the opposite way around. Again, go for the steal with the ace-10 off from in position. Probably on the thinner side, considering the stacks behind look, you know, mostly 10 big blinds and less. But obviously happy to call the button, the small blind, and I think calling the big blind would be close, but probably a fold. But certainly be calling the button and the small blind. In the party high roller, we go multi-way with nines. I think we were the Polifa progressor. We isolated a UTG open. Looks like we check on 6-3-8, 3 diamonds multi-way. Checking to check fold seems a little weak, even against J Thaddeus and Vinky. I'm not like, I think checking to call if Vinky bet and Thaddeus folded was probably my original intention. However, I think we can just, you know, protect our range and c-bet this flop, and, you know, be confident enough that in a three-way pot they're going to be sort of playing their ranges, you know, straightforward enough that we're not going to have to worry about, you know, folding the best hand or whatever. Table 9, we defend an early position open with ace queen with the ace of spades. Table 6 in the T-Rex, we 3-bet a button open with ace king off, flop the nuts. Pretty decent board for our overall range, and it's a board that obviously I'd be in a 3-bet pot, I'd be firing at least twice on as a bluff. I think his button range defending to 3 bets is going to contain a lot of one pair hands, one pair hand plus draws, basically a lot of hands which he peels with that are going to fold to you know, continued aggression on turn and river. In the big 1-6-2 table 9, we check raised on 2-8-3-3 spades with our ace of spades. I think it's a board where we can have a decent bluff range. Obviously, we have all sets in our range. Don't really have any 2-pair combos, but against, you know, we could, in that sort of situation, we could build history and start sort of check raising tens plus for value. I don't particularly like sort of check raising too wide for value against an early position opener, who obviously has a considerably stronger range in general. However, I think against weaker, more straightforward players, there's a number of things that you can do to sort of work to your advantage in that sort of situation. Sorry about this. It looks like I'm trying to pull up a party table that's not opening off screen. In the T-Rex, opening the 9-5 off on the button, pretty standard, with the blinds still sort of relatively deep. I've actually started to play Eurosites without HUD. Since this session, I actually prefer it quite a lot. I've got quite a good feature, which is pretty standard for PT4 users, where I can simply just click one button and it brings up the HUD. The HUD is absent for the entire time I'm playing, apart from the times that I want it, and I can just one click and get the HUD up. I think it's a pretty effective way to play, as it sort of keeps the tables cleaner, and I find it incredibly difficult to follow the action on Eurosites when the HUD is overlapping stack sizes, especially on sort of the party tables where the names sort of fade in and out, as you can, when people have cards and when they don't, and I find that very confusing. So yeah, playing without HUD I find quite beneficial for me because it keeps everything much easier to see, and I'm always quite concerned with, you know, being able to see everything, especially even like with full tilt tables. I often find the HUD overlaps certain players when they've invested money in the pot, and I don't notice it. Pretty easy jam here in the Hoss 55 against a guy we have no information on, but obviously cut off versus small blind for 18-17 big blinds. Really happy jam. In the T-Rex, I think flatting is a good option. with absence of reads, all we know is the guy's running 10-4 over 34 hands. So I think, flatting is our best option. We have sort of some weaker hands in our perceived range, so depending on board texture, we can, make a lot of money against his overpairs that are weaker than ours. And just, him, if he's an aggressive player, he can use his perceived early position image to barrel all the runouts, and obviously we have, a decent value bluff catcher against his range. When he checks to us here, I do expect him to be check giving up an awful lot of the time. However, it is a board that I would be firing on with 100% of my range when checked to. So, even though it's not important to be balanced in general, I think, in that sort of situation, it's nice to just, and it's also just nice to protect my hand against whatever his, if he's sort of check folding ace king, ace queen type hands. We don't give him a free roll. But yeah, obviously, when you start to build up a dynamic where people are sort of protecting their checking ranges on that sort of board texture, and they know that you're going to sort of fire a lot as a bluff when checked to, it's going to be important to increase your value range and sort of bet like. I think it obviously depends on the dynamic you have and how frequently you're bluffing in that spot, as to what what you set to the bottom of your value range is. Depending on play, you could go as low as like pocket 8s, pocket 9s, certainly 10x of value. It all just depends on how frequently your opponent perceives you to be bluffing when checked to, and how protected their checking range is. It's like, obviously, if someone's checking full houses and sets and whatever, 7x overpairs better than yours, i.e. checking like at least some of the time their whole range, you need to be more careful with the frequencies of which you're bluffing, and the bottom of your value range has to change, etc. We missed one hand in the Sunday Million where I opened 5s and got 3-bet readless from the small blind to 2.5x, and I've folded playing 30 big blinds deep. Again, it's a spot where if I have more information, more feelers to the flow of the table, etc., but pretty difficult to make that sort of assumption when we've just moved to the new table. So I think it's pretty standard fold. Open the 4s, table 7 in the Sunday 500. Go freeway with this jostle guy who's been playing pretty wide and pretty bad, and sort of what looks like a tight, straightforward reg. I think betting is okay here. I think my betting range is perceived to be quite strong. I think we take down the pot a good amount of the time just against sort of random high cards, and obviously they are going to have pairs in their range, but I think we win the pot. I think we don't need to perceive it that big either, like sort of a bet of about 240, sort of only risking, sorry about the table popping up there, yeah, betting about 40% of the pot, whatever. I'll bet only needing to work sort of 1 in 3 times. Seems a reasonable play. In the this is a GSOP table 4. I think both free betting and flatting are fine options, blind versus blind here with the 8-10 of clubs. We get lucky and river a boat in the Sunday 500. It's a spot obviously where we don't really have many bluffs in our range. So sizing could be really incorrect, or whatever. You can't really. I feel like I can't really make any informed decisions about it. Get into a flip with a short stack in the hot 55, and there was no reason for the tank other than that I was just paying attention to other tables. It looks like we took the free bet down in the GSOP. When it comes to constructing 3-bet ranges in sort of blind versus blind situations, often it's quite player dependent. If you're sort of facing as someone who's going to peel ridiculously wide to 3-bets, obviously you want to widen your 3-bet range for value, and 3-bet as a bluff more infrequently, and sort of flat, more raggier hands that would work better as a 3-bet bluff against people who fold quite tightly to 3-bets. So yeah, talking about what ranges to sort of free bet from the big blind against a small blind open is certainly quite opponent specific. I mean, you can sort of, I can give you some generalities that obviously you want to sort of free bet a value range where you feel like your opponent's going to be sort of calling with a lot of hands that you do well against in a 3-bet pot. Obviously your sort of strict value range against whatever type of player they are is going to be, I think you can sort of, no matter what the player type, you can always be sort of free betting 9s plus, ace jack suited plus for value, even if they are sort of the nitties of the nits. Even in that situation, they're still going to continue with a range that you do really well against, which makes free betting obviously a good option for value. A couple spots here. In the T-Rex table 6, we open 8s under the gun, get a flat, and c-bet on 2-8-10 rainbow. In the party high roller, we open 7-5 suited on the cutoff, flop, bottom 2 pair. Just going back to that blind versus blind and take it down. Going back to that blind versus blind situation, and obviously we want to sort of free bet more of our raggy hands, which we feel are become sort of thin EV wise, just sort of defending as a flat. Even though obviously the power position is pretty useful, we just feel like our hand becomes more immediately profitable by 3-betting and taking it down pre, which obviously works a lot better against high volume players and players who don't peel significantly wider 3-bets, or players. It also works well against players who 4-bet rather than flat a lot of their continuing hands. So that's just something to think about. Looks like having some trouble with party. I remember I was struggling to get one of the tables to pop up at all, so I've just exited the client and I'm going to restart it. So we'll get the high roller back in play in a second, along with our other two that were off screen. In the big 162, slightly prefer squeezing when the sort of the tighter player flats behind, as I think his flatting range is very rarely going to be with a strong hand, simply because the opener is opening from sort of more middle position, and I just expect him to free bet the stronger parts of his hand. The stronger parts of his range. It does happen that he did have the stronger parts of his range and just sort of ripped it over our squeeze. But obviously a pretty happy call, I think. Decide to fold a6 off in the cutoff. Table 6 for the T-Rex. For no particular reason, I'll open it sometimes. Certainly deeper stages with antes in play becomes a pretty habitual open. Table 7 Sunday 500, open 7s and go 3 ways. One of the better boards for my hand where I don't hit a set. I'm happy to sort of turn my hand into a bluff depending on the run out. I think I can certainly rep a reasonably strong range in a 3-way pot against a small blind defend. I think checking back on this particular turn is somewhat reasonable, even though I think he probably folds. He might fold 9x on this turn, but he might expect us to sort of barrel a bunch of hands. Might expect us to sort of barrel a bunch of hands where where we pick up additional equity, and it makes it pretty awkward given on sort of certain river cards and certain river situations. And I think sort of checking back the turn solves some of those issues. Table 1 on the Sunday mulligan, we peel a under the gun open and then peel a button squeeze. It goes 3 ways. I think you could probably argue for a back raise, get it in. However, I think we're also deep enough that peeling is fine, and considering we don't have an abundance of information, I think peeling is a fairly decent option. Flop goes check, check, check. It's sort of board where I expect them to sort of check back, or the sort of the pre-flop squeezer to check back all of his sort of ace high hands and be fairly unbalanced on the whole. So I think leading the turn for value is certainly very reasonable. Against the cutoff here, who also peeled the squeeze, I think his range is going to certainly contain sets. Going to contain. I think he slow plays all of the hands that are ahead of us, and I also think he doesn't value bet like King Jack or Queen Jack on the river, and I actually think it's really difficult for him to have those hands anyway. So I think his river betting range, or as it happens, his river jamming range, is all set combos, so a set of jacks, 8s, 6s, 5s. If he somehow manages to get there with 5s pre, and then the only possible hands I think we may occasionally get bluffed by are hands like ace 10 of spades, maybe some sort of random like 9 10 of spades type hands. But I think his combos of bluffs are sort of fairly infrequent. And this one, the high roller here, we open queens UTG, or sorry, we open queens. Thaddeus calls from the big blind. We see bet on queen 10-10. He check raises the turn. When he check raises the turn here, I expect him to sort of maybe check raise turn spades, maybe check raise some random air hands if he feels like I am. Randomly double barreling this board with a lot of gut shots, he may turn like sort of like say pocket 7s into a bluff, which I don't think is 100% unreasonable. And Sunday million here, we turn the nuts and get led into, but with diamonds out there and the board paired, I think slow playing is a pretty awkward situation, and I think jamming is the only play. We do jam the river against Thaddeus there, and he folds, so I expect him to just have some sort of, pair turned into a bluff on the turn, or random gutter that he decided to check raise the turn with, basically just assuming that my double barrel range had enough gut shots itself and enough sort of pairs that I was looking to sort of just protect my range and keep my range uncapped with, that he felt he could get away with a check raise bluff. I don't think it's a completely unreasonable situation, even though I have sort of talked in the previous video about in general having tripling ranges on 10-10x boards or higher. I don't particularly rate it, although obviously it's a different situation considering the board also gave us a plethora of open-enders and gut shots, so it doesn't really apply as such. But yeah, you get the point. In this under 500 here, we defend an open with pocket 7s. Flop comes Jack 2-2 and the guy bets about 35% of the pot. I think folding is a fairly decent play if we assume his early position range is going to just fire a lot, which I think is a reasonable assumption. Considering I don't think most people will adopt the sort of strategy of not firing for value on sort of 10 on high card paired boards, high paired boards, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I assume his range is barreling fairly frequently there, and it's obviously a pretty bad situation for us to be sort of just check calling, intending for him to check fold if we don't think it's going to happen all that often. So yeah, I think check folding is a fine play. if his open was from later position, then I think check calling becomes pretty mandatory. Open the queen 10 of diamonds in early position here and go three-way with J Thaddeus and the small blind. I think we get a lot of credit for sort of c-betting this type of board from under the gun, even though we don't actually have any sort of backdoor diamonds. We only have a gut shot. I think I think they're going to just have enough sort of random unpaired cards and enough sort of high King X hands, and even it's possible they'd sort of fold a hand like 9-10, Jack 9, if they perceive my range to be strong and barreling fairly frequently. Table 3, the Hod 55, we get a min open from a guy playing 35% of hands, like a 74. 35% of 74 hands, so snap, fist pump jam, obviously. And he unfortunately does wake up with pocket nines, and we're going to bring in another table. In the on-game 100 cubed, decide to open 7-6 of spades under the gun. I think it's on the thin side at a tough table, certainly. However, I think it's probably fine on a Euro site. Although this is the sort of open that could quickly become fairly unprofitable. If people assumed that my under the gun range was fairly strong and therefore were flatting stronger hands themselves, I think my bluffs, I'm bluffing into a stronger range and trying to value bet against a stronger range, so it all gets a bit messy quite quickly if that's the case. However, obviously with our 7 high there on Queen 10-3 Rainbow, pretty much the only players to see bet and try and take it down. So we decide to defend Queen 10 off in the big 162 towards the bottom of my offsuit queen defending range against an early position opener, and pretty happy to fold on the King 5-4 texture against against his early position range. He's probably going to be barring a King X texture fairly frequently, and obviously our equity is non-existent, so I think pretty trivial check fold. I do advocate defending the big blind with a fairly wide range, and I think I've done that quite frequently throughout the video from the big blind. Defending a decently wide range from the big blind. However, I think you do have to be careful and make informed decisions when you do have sort of Queen X or 10x hands. Sorry, Queen X, when you do flop when you do flop pairs on Queen X or 10x boards, simply because your implied odds are that are significant against an early position open. Looks like we pause the footage around the break and bring in the Sunday second chance and the Sunday 6 max. In the Sunday 6 max we immediately get a hand. We free bet blind versus blind with the 8-10 off. I think it's the best option. Go for 2 streets of value with second pair, and he ends up having just a jack. I think the hand is pretty straightforward though. In the table 5 in the G-Stock Grand Slam, we get 3-bet by a guy who's only 3-bet 1% of hands, or 1% of trials throughout the 160 hands we've been playing with him. For me, that makes it close between a defend and a 4-bet. I quite like the idea of 4-betting and sort of turning this into the top of my bluffing range, as it blocks a lot of his value combos well. And we do have a slightly awkward situation playing out of position against a very strong, even though it's a somewhat defined, strong pre-betting range. I do tend to, I do think it's a decent play to sort of 4-bet hands which sort of play quite awkwardly against strong pre-betting ranges. Even though we have outlined his 3 betting range as being fairly strong. You know, he may fold tighter than most to our 4 bet. Yeah, so you know, I think you could advocate for both a flat and a 4 bet there. I think some people would definitely lean strongly towards doing one or the other. I tend to sort of mix up both. I think you know, you could argue for reasons for both options. And the big 162, you know, standard button open with the Jack 5 suited. And we get a flat from the small blind, kind of on, well, with no real reads or information to go on, but you know, we can make some sort of general assumptions on the sort of the strength of his small blind defending range. We flop second pair and a backdoor flush draw, and he leads for 33% of the pot. I don't think any play other than flatting is warranted. You know, not much else to talk about. In the party high roller, again, fine open with the Jack 4 suited on the button. And in the Sunday 500, going to open to, I would typically open to 2.5x, 50 big blinds deep. Blind versus blind. I assume I didn't notice the blind change. When he leads onto this, when he leads in the big 162, when he leads into us on this turn, you know, I think a lot of his flop leading range, you know, there's 2 things to consider. One, his sizing has gone from being 33% of the pot to more like 60%. And I think on this turn, you know, he can turn some 2 pairs. Some of his flop leading range is going to sort of be gut shots plus a pair, just random gut shots. So I think overall the strength of his range picks up equity on that turn. So yeah, fairly happy to fold, or certainly very happy to fold. In the Sunday second chance, our table is, you know, three guys I have tagged as sort of good standard regs. I typically give a lot of people that tag before I figure out more sort of what playing style they have. But yeah, I don't really know much about Maniac, Razor and Gov Shark. And I know Vinky's, you know, mostly quite tight and then can be randomly spazzy as well. But yeah, so, and in our Sunday 6 max table, the only player I recognise is Squee. In the championship, open the ace 3 off with 15 big blinds as a steal from the cutoff. Pretty standard hand, I think. Pretty standard steal situation, especially with the small blind being so tight and the big blind having no free bet percentage. I think that makes it better. I think you could argue for an open with the queen 8 off from the cutoff in the Sunday 500 there. Obviously, playing 14 tables, you do tend to miss out on the odd spot or two. With queens now in the Sunday 500, going to be looking to 3-bet jostle for value and get it in pre if we can. I also think, you know, going a slightly bigger size like 2.5x would be fairly typical. 50 big blinds deep in position. Obviously, he makes it bigger than 2x, so you know, you could argue going smaller than that. But I think considering how much he's shown us that he's going to sort of just peel, he's only got a 63% fold to fold to 3-bet, so he's folding fairly infrequently. So I think, you know, we can go slightly bigger for value and expect him to peel with most of his opening range that we do really well against. In big 162 against Kevboy Star, I think 3-betting's a fine option, as is folding. In the Sunday 500, jostle peels, and we get, you know, a decent board for our perceived range. I think we have quite a lot of King X in our 3-betting range. So, you know, I just like to. I typically like to protect my my range in spots like this, and you know, I think it's plausible that he will check call with hands worse than King X as well. Excuse me. So I'm pretty comfortable both sort of betting here for value against sort of pairs like some 8x hands and sort of 9s, 10s, jacks, if he doesn't 4-bet them pre, which I think is a somewhat reasonable assumption. He does go ahead and check raise here, and it's it's somewhat tough to say whether he would check raise bluff against my sort of 35% pot sizing on the flop, c-bet sizing. However, I think it's more likely that, given his player style, I think it's more likely that he would make a mistake and check raise too thin for value, i.e. defend a hand like King 10 suited and then check raise a King X texture, rather than check raise a hand like 9-10 suited. And so yeah, so based on that, I think you could argue that we could peel his flop check raise and then fold to any further action. However, I think we could be making a fairly sizable mistake peeling his flop check raise. Because in order for us to make his flop check raise bluff unprofitable, he either has to be shutting down an incredible amount of time, a really high percentage of the time on the turn on the river, or we have to be calling down at a certain frequency. And given that we don't really have enough concrete reads, I think we won't sort of be putting ourselves in a position with our exact hand to call down with the correct frequency to sort of be exploiting any possible bluffing tendencies. So yeah, I think folding is going to be the best option there. In the big 162, we open and call a 3-bet 100 big blinds deep with pocket 7s. We check on 4-2-10 2 diamonds. I think checking with the intention of calling is fairly reasonable, considering the guy's sort of HUD stats seem to be on the sort of weaker side. I think check folding might be a mistake there. Basically, given those positions, check folding is going to be the best play if we perceive our opponent to be using his positional advantage, given free bet, given the fact that he's been free betting from fairly strong positions. So therefore, use the fact that his perceived range is certainly going to be ahead of ours in most circumstances, and therefore triple with a high frequency. In that sort of situation, check calling the flop with our exact hand is going to be a pretty unprofitable play, because we're going to get blown off our hand so frequently on the turn in the river. Basically, we'd be intending to check call there, hoping that he would check behind on the turn, which I think is a somewhat reasonable play, given that I don't think your average MTT reg is going to, always use sort of his perceived positional advantage and 3-bet, the strength of his perceived 3-bet range to triple with like his high cards and any random bluffs he might have. I think it's more likely that at least a decent chunk of the time he is going to check behind with his air and his sort of high card range, making the check call on the flop better. But against players who are aggressive and strong and using that positional advantage and perceived range advantage to their strengths, I think check folding becomes a far superior play. In the party hurry roller, we go three-way again with J Thaddeus and some random guy. C-bet Queen 7-4 2 hearts and check on the ace of hearts turn. If the ace was sort of like an ace of spades, I think I prefer barreling. As played, I like the check give up, simply because I think on an ace, like a non-ace, a non-heart ace, we have more possible value hands in our turn range. Whereas sort of when the turn's the ace of hearts, we only sort of really have ace jack, ace queen plus for value, considering the flush gets there. So I think check folding is a fine option there. Jam in the championship with just over 10 big blinds and in second position with the ace jack off. and the big one and the Sunday 6 max going to defend against the pockets. Sorry, going to flat the pocket sevens against the end of gun open. I don't think there's any other play in that situation. Got a flop of King 2-8 2 clubs, and he c-bets on the smaller side, also like 45% of the pot. I think folding is fine, given that we don't really have that many reads early on, and in general, when I employ aggressive early game strategies, I like to be the one making in control of the hand, in control of the aggression. We may have a profitable bluff raise against this sort of small sizing in that situation. However, against a competent hand reader, and I do tend to, I don't know if I worry about this sort of too much, but when I do make bluffs and when I sort of do look at what range I can value bet with, I do make sure that I can credibly rep a suitable range. So in that situation on King 8-2, considering he's opening from under the gun, our only sort of happy value raising range is a set of 8s or a set of 2s. It's going to be a pretty awkward situation if we're going to try and raise sort of King Jack or King Queen for value, because in most cases the only range that he's going to continue with when we raise is going to be hands that are ahead of us. I mean, it's going to be a pretty specific dynamic if we're going to get him to call a check raise with bluffs, or sorry, call a raise with bluffs, or worse value hands, especially given those positions. So yeah, it's something that I tend to keep in mind when I play. I like to always have an idea of what value hands I can rep, how thin I can go for value, and when I am bluffing, do I have enough thin value hands in my perceived range? Do I have enough value hands in my range to make my bluff line credible? And even though I may miss out on a few sort of one street bluffs, or a few one street bluffs against attacking some sort of sizing weakness or something like that, it does, employing playing the way I do does give me a good idea of how people play, and it allows me to sort of constantly keep my hand reading skills well oiled, and it allows me, especially in reg versus reg battles, to set up myself up with a certain image that I can take to future situations. Use sort of those more sort of game theory based strategies to my advantage. In the Sunday 6 max here, we 3-bet the ace-jack suited button versus cutoff. I think peeling is a fine option, and maybe even slightly better option in an MTT. We get cold 4-bet by the small blind, and again, given our lack of information, I think folding is the only play we can make it. Excuse me. But yeah, I think peeling is certainly a good option there as well. If it might even be the best option. In the Sunday second chance, get quite an interesting hand here. We get an open from a random and a flat from Manic Razor, who I specified I didn't know much about. Vinky squeezes on the button, and as we've established, Vinky does have that sort of more aggressive, more wild side. So I think we can just about justify 4-betting our hand here. I don't think from the small blind out of position we can flat profitably, but I do think our hand is sort of slightly too strong to be folding. I think also what works in our favour is they're going to perceive my 4-betting range to be stronger than my exact hand. So I do think I'm going to get a lot of credit, both both to take it down pre, and if I do get a peel from Vinky, I think I get a lot of credit on a lot of boards post. My intention would be to be 4-bet folding here. I don't think we ruin our hand equity by turning our hand effectively into a bluff here, because I really feel like this is the best way we can play it. In the GSOP 500, we open ace king off and get a pretty decent board for our range. I expect him to have a lot of random high cards that are behind ours, and he may well peel these hands, float these hands, and then fold on a lot of turns. So on this king x turn, obviously I'm going to be tripling my range here. Maybe I would, I'd probably sort of triple as a bluff less frequently than I would for value, but obviously now that the king has come, we have ace king, pretty comfortable triple for value. I think he peels in Sunday's second chance. I expect him to have hands like sort of middling strength suited connectors, some suited broadways, some maybe stronger suited ace x's, and he may possibly have some sort of pre-flop slow plays. I don't expect him to have a raising range. Okay, let me rephrase slightly. I don't expect a good player to ever have a raising range on that flop, simply because it's going to be a pretty bad situation, or a pretty bad way to bluff. When my perceived range is fairly decently strong, if not very strong, and he's not going to be wanting to raise his sets, etc., or if he has any slow plays. So I would expect a decent player to peel all of their slow played pre-flop range, any sets that they've managed to hit on the flop, and any bluffs they decide to peel. I expect all of those all up their entire continuing range to be as a peel rather than a raise. So my intention would be to after c-betting the flop would be to, in general, check fold the turn. Even though I do expect a good player to as I said, peel his bluffs, I would certainly wait to think he's peeling range to value hands. So my intention in most scenarios, in most cases, would be to check fold the turn, unless it came like an ace or a king, and I felt like he may peel once with say jacks and folded turn always. I could turn my hand into a bluff in that sort of situation. In the GSOP mini here, table 5, again the hard example of the HUD getting in the way. 25 big blinds deep, I decided to peel pre-ante with ace-4 hearts. I think it's slightly better than jamming, although I could be incorrect there. He leads for half pot, and even though we have a gut shot, I think it's kind of like negligible equity. I don't think he's going to be firing once in this texture with his stack size all that often. So I think the best play is to fold. Yeah, I just don't assume with his stack size. I just assume he's either going to protect the chip stack he has by check folding the flop, or I assume he's going to bet to get all of his chips in, bet the flop, and then proceed to get all of his chips in on the turn of the river. We do take a stab, which I think is obviously fairly reasonable after he's checked the turn, but I do expect him to check. Yeah, he does check jam, which I think is just a product of him betting the flop. I really feel like his flop betting range is very, very rarely slowing down, shutting down at all. I think we're coming to the end of the footage now. I can't remember. Yeah, this was the last sort of few minutes I recorded on this particular Sunday. I can't remember if it was because I suddenly busted a load of tables, or just because the action dried up somewhat. But this is pretty much the end of the footage I have. I'm just going to talk through these last few hands, and then we'll wrap it up. Please leave any questions or comments that you have about either video part that I've done. Criticisms, encouragement, whatever. Anything's good. If you have any recommendations of if you'd like to see a future video, and if that's the case, if you'd like it in a different format, same format, yeah, or if you would like me to never make another video again, obviously that's useful to know as well. Just talk about these last couple hands. So in the Sunday Million, we c-bet kings with the king of hearts multi-way, and I think just jamming the turns our only real play. And, a random the Sunday Million is going to have so many sort of random one pair hands that I don't think he's going to fold. And if he does somehow manage to get there with any two pair combos, we have equity that we can use to suck out on, as we do. Yeah, so okay, so this is going to be the end of the footage. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and as I say, please leave any questions or comments that you have. Okay, cheers guys, thank you.